Bitcoin remains all the rage, and in a three-part series we've been looking at Bitcoin as money, Bitcoin as a ledger, and Bitcoin as code. Today we're going beyond that to see what you can do when you're going into ledger specifics and start challenging governments over their monopoly on the ledger. This is Liberties Report. I'm Rick Falkvinge.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
In the decline of the Western Roman Empire, taxes were scarce and very necessary to maintain the Pax Romana and the hungry Roman army. The Emperor Valentinian III decreed a transaction tax of 4%, our equivalent of today's sales tax, which was to be levied on all transactions. This required an ability to see the ledger, which the Roman Empire obviously didn't have. So to circumvent this problem, they required a tax collector to be physically present as soon as there was a monetary transaction anywhere. The Western Roman Empire fell shortly thereafter, and this goes to show just how important access to the ledger and authoritative access to writing the ledger is to maintaining a government. We have the honor today to have Susanne Tarkowski Tempelhof with us, the founder of BitNation, who's doing such a challenge to the governments of today, or perhaps not a challenge as much as a supplement, at least initially. Well, welcome to the show, Susanne. Can you tell us a little bit about how BitNation came to be?
Hi, Eric, and thank you so much for having me on. So I started BitNation about 15 months ago, July 2014. And what I wanted, which I declared in my TED Talk a few years earlier, was to see a world of millions of competing governments who compete for providing better and cheaper services for customers rather than through the use of violence within arbitrary drawn lines called borders. And I think the time is ripe for that because of internet, global communications, transportation, etc. So I started BitNation, which is an open source code for dispute resolution, basically building on the blockchain technology. So we have the blockchains, we have ID and reputation, public notary, and now we're building the, more of the tokenization and all that sort of stuff. So on top of that open source ledger, you can build basically whatever apps you want, right? Security, insurance, etc.
So this is amazing. You're essentially taking the ledger's ability to authoritatively say what is true and what is false. And you're using that to compete on a purely commercial basis with today's governments, observing that you have 196 governments to choose from in today's physical territories. You're enabling people to go beyond that, to choose any governmental structure they want.
Yeah, exactly. And also to create their own, right? If they don't like BitNation, that's not a problem. They can just fork the code and create their own.
Are you also connected to the seasteading movement, which seeks to create actual territories on international waters to enable people to create their own governments, or is this purely in the cloud on the blockchain at the moment?
Well, we're good friends with them. We talk regularly, both with Oceanus and the Seasteading Institute. So far, we haven't, done anything together, but hopefully we'll get the opportunity to do something together in the future.
Sounds lovely. And this week, a couple of very interesting things happened with BitNation. First, you signed a deal with Estonia, and specifically the Estonian e-residency program that actually acknowledges BitNation's services as full notary, public notary validity. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think it's quite a revolutionary step because, normally nation-state governments doesn't really recognize virtual nations, right? So to have a senior government official publicly say that he likes the fact that, nation-states and virtual nations are competing and collaborating is pretty huge. And we really like Estonia because their e-residency thing, which permits anyone anywhere in the world to become an e-resident, is very much in line with BitNation, what we do at BitNation, right? And they are also fostering, even though they are a nation state, they're also fostering competition on a global and free market. So, I'm very excited about it altogether.
It is quite revolutionary that a legacy territorial nation state does recognize one of these new virtual blockchain-based governments, if you like, or at least
Nations. I prefer nations in government.
Yes, I was trying to find a term here, something like provider of governance services. Do you have such a term already, Susanne?
No, I mean I was using non-geographical governance service aggregators,
Well,
which
that's a
is
good one.
obviously awkward as a term, you know.
Kind of long. It'll once it enters the public language, it'll shorten until it's one syllable. That's the way things work. We also
Well,
have
let's
on
say
the
BitNations, you know.
so
I mean,
BitNations is good. BitNations is good. We also have on the line Tetsuo Kaneda, who's a long-time observer and activist with this kind of interesting initiatives. Welcome to the show, Tetsuo.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. You have quite a bit of insight into what's going on with this BitNation Estonia deal and BitNation in general. Do you have any comments on it?
Well, I like the fact that we're seeing the blockchain becoming a more obvious and secure means to self-govern. The infrastructure itself and all the apps that can be developed on top of it can actually provide all these services that governments currently provide in a much cheaper way, using decentralized mechanisms and truly allowing everybody to have a free choice about where they want to live their lives, whether it's speaking just politically or geographically.
Right, but it goes beyond where they choose to live their lives, right? This is also about choosing a jurisdiction. You can be an e-resident in Estonia while you live, say, on the Canary Islands or somewhere with, if it's allowed to say so, a more, well, pleasing climate, at least wintertime, than Estonia, while still taking advantage of Estonia's or anybody else's jurisdiction. Isn't that right?
Yes, there's whenever we contract with one another, if we stipulate where we're going to adjudicate any disputes, that's generally held to be legal as part of your private contract. This is extending that a little further with government services, and in particular with Estonia. We have the chance to strengthen our position among traditional nation states. As we might see cyberspace as perhaps not the most favored place to establish a nation, but I think given the technology and the way that typical nation states are behaving at this point, most people are ready to see something alternative come out of the scene.
I couldn't agree more. The future is really interesting. And going back to Susanne, something really interesting happened this week with a couple signing a marriage contract in BitNation's service on the blockchain as part of this Estonian e-residency program, essentially making this marriage contract legal under Estonian jurisdiction. I think this is an extremely interesting development. Going back to Susanne, what can you tell us about this event?
Yeah, Rick. So the couple got married and it was super, super romantic. You can find the video on YouTube. Please watch it and leave them some well wishes. It's quite interesting because they are both from the Basque country, which is not recognized as a country. So since they couldn't get married in what they consider being their country, they choose to get married on BitNation, and they don't want, a nation state or a church or anything involved in it. This couple have also applied to license and waiting for their cards, but I weren't at the time of the marriage. So if you want to get married or file any other agreement, you don't have to be any resident, but it adds extra value if you are one, because then you have a more secure identity, right? So anyway, so to come back a little bit to what you said about the contract being recognized in Estonia, the marriage contract being recognized in Estonia, the way it works is that marriage is an agreement between two or more persons, and where you have certain terms and conditions, expectations, etc., that governs the relationship. And a contract, even a verbal agreement, is mutually it's legally binding in basically all jurisdictions around the world, unless there's something specifically in that jurisdiction that says it's not for whatever reason, or it have to be done this way, which obviously differ from one jurisdiction to another. So I like to call it the blockchain jurisdiction.
The blockchain jurisdiction. Good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, right. Later on we will have the BitNation jurisdiction, right, which will be more specific because of our specific dispute resolution applications. But for now, it's the blockchain jurisdiction at large. So a term that I coined.
Fair enough, but I mean, the mere availability for signing a marriage contract when, like you say, you were living in a jurisdiction that wasn't recognized by the legacy structure. That means you're already enabling governance services that have previously not been available to, well, even if these people are not stateless, certainly stateless people and those who, for some reason, would describe themselves as stateless, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I mean, there are about 11 million stateless people in the world, I think.
That's quite a bit of people.
Yeah, and that doesn't even take refugees into account.
Right, who are displaced and for other reasons can't access their governance services. So where do we go from here?
So as we talk about self-determination, from a political standpoint, we're going to continue moving forward being recognized as a legitimate nation, even within the UN and other nation states, hopefully. That's going to take some doing. That's going to be a rather interesting approach, given that the jurisdiction is the blockchain itself. The way that cyberspace law and international law regards treaties like the Outer Space Treaty, we start getting into a realm that probably is more appropriate for cyberspace. And there are a lot of discussions going on professionally. Lawrence Lessig seems to be a pretty big champion about promoting a legitimate jurisdiction in the cyberspace. Has some different views about it than perhaps other nation states, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have and worth promoting.
I couldn't agree more. Susanne, what are your thoughts on this as regards BitNation and your own thinking?
Well, I think it has to happen because the nation-state model isn't sustainable anymore. And the alternative to the nation-state model is, United Nations or organizations like United Nations, which would be absolutely horrific. I mean, think about it. A one-fit-all model for all 7 billion people on Earth, that's even worse than the, current 200 or so nation-state alternatives. So, that would lead to like decades of war and conflict if that was ever the case. So, I mean, what we are doing is what I believe is the only way to do it.
And what a beautiful future we're all creating here. Thank you for building BitNation, Susanne. Thank you for the commentary, Tetso. It is very valuable. And I think we'll agree that we can look forward to a day when if we're not happy with our government, we're actually free to just start our own or select from one of thousands out there that are already available. I'm Rick Falkinge, and this is Liberty Talk. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.